Let me ask you a simple question. Why do some people keep moving forward financially while others seem stuck in the same place year after year? Most people already have an answer. They'll say it's because of the economy, because of bad luck, because they weren't born into a rich family, because they didn't get the right education, because they don't have connections. And sure, all of those things can make life harder. Nobody is saying the playing field is perfectly equal. But if those were the only reasons people succeed or fail, then nobody from a poor background would ever become wealthy, and nobody from a wealthy family would ever lose everything. Yet we see both happen all the time. That's because money problems are often not really money problems. They're behavior problems. They're mindset problems. They're decision-making problems. A lot of people spend years trying to change their financial situation without ever changing the habits and beliefs that created that situation in the first place. Imagine a person who keeps saying they want more money. They talk about it every day. They watch motivational videos. They read books about success. They make plans. They dream about the future. But when an opportunity appears, they hesitate. When work gets difficult, they quit. When learning something new becomes uncomfortable, they stop. When they fail, they immediately look for someone else to blame. Years go by, and nothing changes. Not because they lacked opportunity, because they lacked the habits necessary to take advantage of opportunity. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing that wealth is something that happens to you, as if one day a magical opportunity will arrive and suddenly change everything. But that's rarely how real life works. Most successful people didn't wake up rich. They slowly built skills. They developed discipline. They learned how to solve problems. They became valuable, and then the money followed. The truth is that money is often a byproduct. It's a result. It's the scorecard, not the game itself. The game is becoming the kind of person who can consistently create value. Think about it. If two people are given the exact same opportunity, why does one succeed while the other fail? The opportunity wasn't different. The people were different. One person acted, the other hesitated. One person took responsibility, the other made excuses. One person learned from mistakes, the other became discouraged. The difference wasn't luck. The difference was mindset and behavior. And that's why some people remain stuck for decades. They keep focusing on external factors while ignoring internal ones. It's easier to blame the economy than to admit you're procrastinating. It's easier to blame other people than to admit you're afraid. It's easier to complain about successful people than to ask yourself what they're doing differently. The uncomfortable truth is that growth starts when excuses end. That doesn't mean life is fair. It doesn't mean everyone starts from the same position. It simply means that focusing on things you can't control rarely improves your situation. Successful people understand this. When something goes wrong, they ask, "What can I do now?" Not, "Whose fault is this?" That small difference changes everything. Because one question creates action, the other creates helplessness. And the longer someone lives in a state of helplessness, the harder it becomes to move forward. Another thing people often misunderstand is the relationship between comfort and success. Most people want a better life, but they also want to stay comfortable. The problem is that growth usually lives outside comfort. Learning a new skill is uncomfortable. Starting a business is uncomfortable. Making sales calls is uncomfortable. Speaking in public is uncomfortable. Applying for better opportunities is uncomfortable. Nearly everything that improves your life requires you to feel awkward, uncertain, or afraid at first. Yet many people spend their entire lives avoiding those feelings. Then they wonder why nothing changes. The people who get ahead are not necessarily smarter. They're not necessarily more talented. Many times they're simply more willing to tolerate discomfort. They understand that temporary discomfort often creates long-term rewards, while temporary comfort often creates long-term regret. Think about how many dreams have been destroyed by waiting. Waiting for confidence, waiting for the perfect moment, waiting for better circumstances, waiting until everything feels safe. The perfect moment almost never arrives. Life rewards movement, not perfection. The people who build wealth are usually not the people who know the most. They're the people who do the most. They take action before they feel ready. They make mistakes, they learn, they adjust, and then they keep going. Meanwhile, others stay on the sidelines, analyzing every possibility, looking for certainty, trying to avoid failure. Ironically, that fear of failure often becomes the reason they fail. Because while they're waiting, life keeps moving. Opportunities come and go, markets change, industries evolve, years pass, and eventually they realize they've spent more time thinking about success than actually pursuing it. That's a hard realization, but it's also an important one. Because the moment you realize the problem isn't just outside of you, you gain power. If the problem is entirely external, there's nothing you can do. But if your habits, decisions, and mindset play a role, then you can change them. And that's good news, because you have control over those things. You can become more disciplined. You can become more resilient. You can learn new skills. You can improve your thinking. You can develop better habits. None of those changes happen overnight, but every successful person starts somewhere. The first step is being honest. Honest about what's helping you. Honest about what's holding you back. And honest about the fact that sometimes the biggest obstacles are not the economy, your boss, your family, or your circumstances. Sometimes the biggest obstacles are the habits you've accepted and the fears you've refused to confront. And among those obstacles, two stand out more than almost anything else. One is laziness. The other is pride disguised as fear. They quietly stop people from taking action, creating opportunities, and building wealth. Most people don't realize how much damage these two traits can cause until years have already passed. And that's exactly where the conversation gets interesting. When most people hear the word lazy, they picture someone lying on a couch all day, someone watching TV for hours, someone sleeping until noon, someone who refuses to work. But real laziness is often much harder to see. In fact, some lazy people look extremely busy. They're constantly talking, constantly planning, constantly researching, constantly preparing. Yet somehow they never actually move. And that's the most dangerous kind of laziness, because it disguises itself as productivity. You know the type of person. They've been talking about starting a business for 3 years. They've watched hundreds of videos, read dozens of books, listened to countless podcasts, but they've never sold a single product, never made a single offer, never taken the first real step. They aren't lacking information, they're lacking action. And action is what changes lives. The truth is, most people already know what they should be doing. They know they should exercise. They know they should save money. They know they should learn valuable skills. They know they should stop wasting time. They know they should work harder on their goals. The problem isn't knowledge. The problem is execution. There has never been a time in human history when information was more available. You can learn almost anything online: business, marketing, sales, investing, fitness, communication, languages. The knowledge is there, yet millions of people remain stuck. Why? Because knowledge without action has almost no value. Imagine someone who reads 50 books about swimming, studies every swimming technique, watches Olympic competitions, learns all the science behind movement in water, but never gets into a pool. Will they become a swimmer? Of course not. At some point, learning has to become doing, and that's where many people fail. Because action creates risk, action creates uncertainty, action creates the possibility of failure. Thinking feels safe, planning feels safe, research feels safe, but action exposes you to reality, and reality doesn't always feel good. You might get rejected, you might make mistakes, you might lose money, you might embarrass yourself. So instead of acting, people stay in preparation mode forever. It feels productive, but it's actually just fear wearing a different outfit. One of the biggest lies people tell themselves is, "I'm waiting until I'm ready." The problem is that nobody ever feels completely ready. The entrepreneur doesn't feel ready. The investor doesn't feel ready. The public speaker doesn't feel ready. The person changing careers doesn't feel ready. Readiness is often created through action, not before it. Confidence doesn't come first. Action comes first, then confidence follows. Think about learning how to ride a bicycle. Nobody gains confidence before getting on the bike. Confidence comes after falling, adjusting, and trying again. The same principle applies to money and success. People often believe successful individuals have some special motivation that ordinary people don't, but that's not usually true. Most successful people don't wake up every morning feeling inspired. They don't magically love hard work every second of the day. What separates them is that they act even when they don't feel like it. That's called discipline. And discipline is far more valuable than motivation. Motivation comes and goes. Discipline stays. Some days you'll feel excited. Some days you'll feel tired. Some days you'll feel discouraged. If your success depends entirely on your mood, your progress will always be inconsistent. The people who build wealth learn how to operate regardless of how they feel. They understand something simple. The work still needs to get done, whether you're motivated or not, whether you're excited or not, whether conditions are perfect or not. The work remains. And every day you avoid it, someone else is doing it. That's another reality people don't like to hear. While you're procrastinating, someone else is improving. While you're hesitating, someone else is learning. While you're making excuses, someone else is building experience. The world doesn't pause because you're unsure. It keeps moving. And over time, those small daily actions create massive differences. Many people think success comes from one big breakthrough, one lucky opportunity, one life-changing moment. But most wealth is built through small actions repeated consistently. A phone call made today, a skill learned this month, a project started this year, a habit maintained for 5 years. Those things don't seem dramatic, but they compound. And compounding works in both directions. Good habits compound. Bad habits compound too. Every day you delay important work, you're strengthening the habit of delay. Every day you avoid responsibility, you're strengthening the habit of avoidance. Every day you choose comfort over growth, you're reinforcing that pattern. Then years later, people say, "I don't know why my life hasn't changed." But life is often the result of repeated choices, not isolated events. This doesn't mean you need to work 20 hours a day. It doesn't mean you need to become obsessed with money. It simply means you need to stop waiting for the perfect mood, the perfect plan, or the perfect moment. Because perfection is often just another excuse. Successful people understand that imperfect action beats perfect planning every single time. A mediocre plan executed today is usually more valuable than a perfect plan that never leaves your notebook. The marketplace rewards execution,
not intentions. The world pays for value created, not dreams imagined. And that's why laziness is so dangerous, not because it makes people do nothing, but because it convinces people they're moving forward when they're actually standing still. Years pass, opportunities disappear, potential fades, and eventually many people realize that their biggest enemy was never lack of opportunity, it was their willingness to act. But as damaging as laziness can be, there's another obstacle that quietly destroys just as many opportunities, in some cases even more. It's something people often mistake for dignity, self-respect, or having standards. But underneath the surface, it's usually something else entirely. Fear. And fear often hides behind what people call pride.
If laziness stops people from taking action, pride often stops people from taking opportunities. And the strange thing is that most people don't even realize it's happening. They don't call it pride, they call it having standards. They call it dignity. They call it self-respect. They say things like, "That's beneath me. I don't want people to think I'm desperate. I don't want to embarrass myself. I don't want to bother people." On the surface, those statements sound reasonable. But if you look deeper, you'll often find something else hiding underneath. Fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of criticism. Fear of failure. Fear of looking foolish. Fear of what other people might think. And that fear becomes incredibly expensive, because opportunities rarely come wrapped in comfort. Most opportunities require you to risk your ego. Think about sales. A lot of people hate selling, not because selling is difficult, but because selling creates the possibility of rejection. Someone might say no. Someone might ignore you. Someone might not be interested. And for many people, that feels unbearable. So they avoid it altogether. The problem is that almost every successful person sells something. Maybe they're selling a product. Maybe they're selling a service. Maybe they're selling an idea. Maybe they're selling themselves during a job interview. Selling is simply a part of life. The people who make money understand this. The people who stay broke often spend years trying to avoid it. The same thing happens with networking. Some people refuse to introduce themselves, refuse to reach out, refuse to start conversations. Why? Because they're afraid of looking awkward. They're afraid of being ignored. They're afraid of hearing no. So instead, they stay silent. And while they're protecting their pride, they're also missing opportunities. It's amazing how many doors remain closed simply because nobody knocked. One of the biggest differences between successful people and unsuccessful people is their relationship with embarrassment. Successful people understand that embarrassment is temporary. Regret can last for decades. Think back to your own life. How many opportunities did you miss because you worried about what other people might think? Maybe you wanted to start a business. Maybe you wanted to create content. Maybe you wanted to apply for a better job. Maybe you wanted to ask someone for advice. Maybe you wanted to learn a new skill. But then that little voice appeared. What if people laugh at me? What if I fail? What if it doesn't work? And just like that, the opportunity disappeared. Not because you weren't capable, not because you lacked talent, because fear won. What's interesting is that most people are far less focused on you than you think. Everyone is busy dealing with their own problems, their own insecurities, their own lives. Yet people spend years being controlled by imaginary judgment. They build entire lives around avoiding criticism, and in the process, they avoid growth. The reality is simple. If you want extraordinary results, you must become comfortable doing things that feel uncomfortable. You must become comfortable being misunderstood, comfortable being rejected, comfortable looking inexperienced, comfortable making mistakes in public.
Every successful entrepreneur has been rejected. Every successful salesperson has been rejected. Every successful creator has been criticized. Every successful leader has been doubted. The difference is they kept moving anyway. Many people think confidence comes first, then action. But that's backwards. Action creates confidence. Every time you face a fear and survive, your confidence grows. Every time you avoid a fear, it grows stronger. This is why some people become trapped for years. The longer they avoid discomfort, the scarier discomfort becomes. Eventually, even small risks feel overwhelming. A simple conversation becomes stressful. A small opportunity feels dangerous. A minor rejection feels devastating. Their world becomes smaller and smaller, not because the opportunities disappeared, because fear took control. And fear is incredibly good at disguising itself. Sometimes it disguises itself as perfectionism. I'll start when everything is perfect. Sometimes it disguises itself as overthinking. I need more information first. Sometimes it disguises itself as pride. That's not for me. But underneath all of those excuses is often the same thing: fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of looking bad. The people who build wealth learn an important lesson. Your feelings don't pay your bills. Your pride doesn't create opportunities. Your ego doesn't generate income. Results come from action, not from protecting your image. That's why some of the wealthiest people in the world are surprisingly practical. They're willing to do things that others consider uncomfortable. They're willing to hear no. They're willing to ask questions. They're willing to make offers. They're willing to take calculated risks. Meanwhile, many people stay stuck because they're trying too hard to protect their pride. They refuse to start small. They refuse to learn from beginners' mistakes. They refuse to do work that doesn't immediately look impressive. As a result, they never gain the experience necessary to reach the next level. There's an old pattern you see everywhere. Some people look down on small opportunities. The problem is that large opportunities often grow out of small ones. The first customer leads to the 10th customer. The 10th customer leads to the 100th. The small project leads to the larger project. The beginner job leads to the better job. But if your pride prevents you from taking the first step, you'll never reach the second. This is why pride can be so destructive. It doesn't look dangerous. It feels like self-protection. It feels like maintaining dignity. But in reality, it's often fear disguised as sophistication. And fear is expensive. It costs people opportunities. It costs people relationships. It costs people experience. And ultimately, it costs people money. The people who move ahead in life aren't necessarily fearless. They're simply willing to act despite fear. They understand that growth requires discomfort. They understand that rejection is part of the process. And they understand that being judged by a few people is a small price to pay for creating the life they want. But even after someone learns to overcome laziness and pride, there's another challenge waiting for them. A challenge that destroys relationships, ruins opportunities, and turns small problems into big ones. That challenge is emotional thinking. Because when problems appear, most people don't focus on solutions. They focus on their feelings.
Life has a way of testing people when they least expect it. A business deal falls apart. A customer complains. A friend disappoints you. A coworker says something disrespectful. A family member creates drama. A partner says something hurtful. Problems show up without warning. And in those moments, something interesting happens. Most people don't immediately focus on solving the problem. They focus on expressing how they feel about the problem. They get angry. They argue. They complain. They blame. They defend themselves. They replay the situation in their head over and over again. Hours turn into days. Days turn into weeks, sometimes months, and the original problem remains unsolved. This is one of the biggest differences between emotionally driven people and solution-oriented people. Emotionally driven people ask, "How do I feel about this?" Solution-oriented people ask, "What needs to happen next?" Now, don't misunderstand the point. Emotions are normal. Everyone experiences anger. Everyone experiences frustration. Everyone experiences disappointment. The goal isn't to become a robot. The goal is to prevent emotions from taking control of your decisions. Because emotions are temporary, the consequences of your decisions are often permanent. Think about how many arguments start with a small problem and become much bigger because emotions take over. Someone says something offensive, the other person reacts emotionally. The first person reacts to that reaction. Soon, neither side is discussing the original issue anymore. They're simply attacking each other. The problem becomes secondary. The battle of emotions becomes primary, and nobody wins. You see this everywhere, in families, in friendships, in business, on social media. People become so focused on being right that they forget to solve the problem. And that's expensive, especially in business and money. Successful people understand something that many people never learn. Being right is often less valuable than getting results. Imagine two business partners having a disagreement. One spends 3 weeks proving that he's correct. The other spends 3 weeks finding a solution. At the end of those 3 weeks, who is in a better position? The person who solved the problem. The marketplace doesn't reward emotional victories. It rewards effective solutions. This is one reason emotionally mature people often appear calm during stressful situations. It's not because they don't care. It's because they understand that panic doesn't improve outcomes. Anger doesn't improve outcomes. Complaining doesn't improve outcomes. Those reactions may feel satisfying in the moment, but they rarely move the situation forward. In fact, they often make things worse. Think about a fire. If a small fire starts in a room, you have 2 choices. You can spend your time yelling about how unfair the fire is, or you can grab water and start putting it out. One response creates progress. The other creates more damage. Life works the same way. The problem may not be your fault, but once the problem exists, your responsibility is deciding how to respond, and your response often determines the outcome. One of the most valuable skills a person can develop is emotional control under pressure. Not because it sounds impressive, because it's profitable. People who remain calm make better decisions. People who make better decisions create better outcomes, and better outcomes usually lead to better opportunities. Consider negotiations. The person who loses emotional control first often loses leverage first. The moment anger takes over, judgment begins to disappear. Rational thinking gets replaced by emotional reactions, and emotional reactions are rarely strategic. The same thing happens in everyday life. Someone insults you. Your first instinct may be to fire back. Someone criticizes you. Your first instinct may be to defend yourself. Someone disagrees with you. Your first instinct may be to argue. But mature people learn to pause long enough to ask a different question. What outcome do I actually want? That's a powerful question because it shifts your focus away from emotions and towards results. Do you want revenge or resolution? Do you want to win the argument or improve the situation? Do you want to protect your ego or protect your future? Those choices matter a lot more than people realize. Many people spend years fighting battles that never needed to be fought. They destroy relationships over pride. They lose opportunities over anger. They burn bridges over temporary emotions. Then later, when the emotions fade, they're left dealing with the consequences. The smartest people understand that not every battle deserves your energy. Not every criticism requires a response.
Not every disagreement requires a fight. Sometimes the strongest move is to stay focused on the bigger objective, because every minute spent feeding negative emotions is a minute not spent building something valuable. Time is limited. Energy is limited. Attention is limited. Successful people guard those resources carefully. They don't waste them on unnecessary drama. They don't waste them on endless arguments. They don't waste them trying to prove themselves to people who don't matter. Instead, they ask, what is the fastest and most effective way to move forward? That's the mindset of someone focused on growth. That's the mindset of someone focused on results. And that's why emotional control is so closely connected to success. The ability to stay calm when others panic. The ability to think clearly when others become emotional. The ability to focus on solutions when others focus on blame. Those skills create enormous advantages over time. Because life will always contain problems, that's unavoidable. The real question is whether you become a problem solver or a problem amplifier. Most people amplify problems with emotion. The people who rise to higher levels usually do something different. They train themselves to focus on solutions first. And when you observe highly successful individuals, you'll notice a pattern. When challenges appear, they don't ask who to blame, they ask how to solve it. And that simple habit changes everything.
If you study successful people long enough, you'll start noticing a pattern. They don't spend much time asking, why did this happen to me? Instead, they ask, what's the best move from here? That difference may sound small, but it changes everything. Most people become trapped in the past. High-level thinkers focus on the future. When something goes wrong, the average person often becomes obsessed with assigning blame. Who caused the problem? Who made the mistake? Who should apologize? Who was right? Who was wrong? Hours, days, and sometimes years are wasted trying to answer those questions. Meanwhile, the problem remains exactly where it started, unsolved. The people who consistently move ahead understand something important. The future doesn't care who was right yesterday. The future responds to what you do today. That's why highly effective people train themselves to focus on solutions, not because they enjoy problems, because solutions create results. Imagine two people facing the exact same setback. Both lose an important client, both lose income, both face uncertainty. The first person spends weeks complaining. They blame the economy, they blame competitors, they blame bad luck. The second person immediately starts asking questions. How do I replace this client? What can I improve? What lessons can I learn? Who should I contact next? One person is emotionally attached to the problem. The other is focused on the solution. A year later, their lives will probably look very different, not because the circumstances were different, because their responses were different. This principle applies to almost every area of life: relationships, business, career, health, finances. Challenges are unavoidable. Your reaction is where the advantage exists. One reason successful people seem calm under pressure is that they've accepted a simple reality. Problems are part of the process. They don't expect life to be free of difficulties. They don't expect every plan to work perfectly. They don't expect everyone to agree with them. Because of that, they don't waste energy being shocked when problems appear. They simply get to work. Think about a pilot flying through turbulence. Imagine if every time the plane shook, the pilot started panicking. Nobody would want to be on that flight. Passengers expect the pilot to remain calm and focused. Life works the same way. The people around you often look to see how you respond when things become difficult. If you panic, the situation usually becomes worse. If you remain focused, solutions become easier to find. This doesn't mean ignoring problems. It means approaching them intelligently. Many people confuse emotional reactions with productive action. They think because they're worried, angry, or stressed, they're doing something useful. But worrying isn't solving. Complaining isn't solving. Blaming isn't solving. Only action solves. Only decisions solve. Only solutions solve. That's why high-level thinkers constantly ask themselves questions that move them forward. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" they ask, "What can I do about it?" Instead of asking, "Whose fault is this?" they ask, "How do we fix it?" Instead of asking, "What did I lose?" they ask, "What do I do next?" Notice the difference. One set of questions creates frustration. The other creates progress. And progress is ultimately what changes lives. This principle becomes even more important when money is involved. In business, emotions can become extremely expensive. Let's say a customer leaves a negative review. Some business owners become defensive. They argue. They attack the customer. They take it personally. Others look at the review and ask, "Is there anything useful here?" Even if the customer was unfair, they search for lessons. They look for ways to improve. They focus on strengthening the business rather than protecting their ego. That's why some businesses grow while others disappear. One focuses on feelings, the other focuses on solutions. The same principle applies to personal finances. Many people spend years complaining about their income, but very little time increasing their value. They'll spend hours discussing what's wrong with the economy, but not 30 minutes learning a skill that could improve their earning potential. Successful people tend to reverse that pattern. They spend less time complaining about circumstances and more time improving themselves, because they understand that the greatest leverage often comes from becoming more valuable. The market pays for value. The more problems you can solve, the more valuable you become. The more valuable you become, the more opportunities appear. That's why high-level thinkers are obsessed with learning. They're constantly improving their skills, improving communication, improving leadership, improving decision-making, improving their ability to solve problems. They know that every improvement increases their future options, and options create freedom. One of the biggest misconceptions about successful people is that they're lucky. Certainly, luck exists. Everyone benefits from luck at some point. But luck alone doesn't explain long-term success. What often looks like luck is actually preparation meeting opportunity. When an opportunity appears, prepared people can take advantage of it. Unprepared people usually can't. And preparation comes from years of focusing on solutions instead of excuses, years of developing skills instead of complaints, years of taking responsibility instead of assigning blame. That's why responsibility is such a powerful concept. Many people avoid responsibility because it feels heavy. In reality, responsibility creates power. The moment you take responsibility, you gain the ability to change things. If everything is someone else's fault, then your future depends on other people. But if you accept responsibility for your actions, your decisions, and your growth, you gain control over your direction. And control is valuable, very valuable. At the end of the day, successful people aren't necessarily smarter than everyone else. They aren't necessarily more talented. They aren't necessarily more fortunate. Often, they simply spend less time dwelling on problems and more time solving them. That habit compounds year after year. Small solutions become bigger opportunities. Bigger opportunities become larger achievements, and eventually, people call it success. But behind that success is usually a simple mindset. Focus less on what went wrong. Focus more on what happens next. Because the people who consistently win in life aren't the ones with the fewest problems. They're the ones who become the best at solving them. And when you combine action, humility, emotional control, and a solution-oriented mindset, something powerful begins to happen. You stop reacting to life. You start directing it. That's where real growth begins. When people talk about success, they usually focus on things that are easy to see: money, cars, businesses, investments, job titles, followers, status. But those are usually the results. Very few people talk about the traits that created those results in the first place. And one of the most valuable traits of all is emotional control. Not intelligence, not talent, not even hard work by itself. Because without emotional control, all of those strengths can be sabotaged. Think about it. How many intelligent people have ruined opportunities because of their temper? How many talented people have destroyed relationships because of their ego? How many hard-working people have quit because they became discouraged? The problem wasn't a lack of ability. The problem was emotional instability. Life is full of situations that test your emotions. You get rejected. You lose money. You make mistakes. You get criticized. You get ignored. You get disappointed. Nobody escapes these experiences. The difference is how people respond to them. Some people let emotions control their decisions. Others learn how to control their emotions. And over time, the gap between those two groups becomes enormous. Imagine two entrepreneurs. Both launch a business. Both face challenges. Both make mistakes. The first entrepreneur takes every setback personally. A customer complains, and he gets angry. Sales drop, and he becomes discouraged. A competitor succeeds, and he becomes jealous. His emotions constantly pull him in different directions. As a result, his decision-making becomes inconsistent. The second entrepreneur experiences the same problems, but instead of reacting emotionally, she analyzes the situation. What happened? Why did it happen? What can be improved? What's the next move? Her emotions still exist, she's human, but they don't control her actions. And that's what gives her an advantage. Because successful people understand something that many people never learn. Your emotions are real, but they are not always reliable. Just because you feel afraid doesn't mean you should stop. Just because you feel discouraged doesn't mean you should quit. Just because you feel angry doesn't mean you should react. Feelings provide information. They should not automatically make decisions. One of the most expensive habits in life is making permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. People quit careers because of a bad week. They end relationships because of one argument. They abandon goals because of one setback. They walk away from opportunities because of fear. Then years later, they wonder what might have happened if they had stayed patient. Emotional control helps prevent those mistakes. It creates space between what happens and how you respond. And inside that space lies your power. The truth is, wealth creation is often boring. It's not always exciting. It's not always dramatic. It usually involves consistent decisions made over long periods of time. Saving money, investing regularly, building skills, solving problems, improving systems, showing up every day. None of those things create instant excitement, but they create long-term results. Emotionally driven people often struggle with this because they constantly chase immediate feelings. They want motivation every day. They want excitement every day. They want instant rewards. But life doesn't work that way. The biggest rewards usually arrive after long periods of discipline. This is why patience is so closely connected to wealth. People who can delay gratification often achieve far more than people who can't. They can sacrifice today's comfort for tomorrow's freedom. They can ignore short-term distractions. They can stay focused while others become impatient. And that ability compounds over time. The same way money compounds. The same way skills compound. The same way relationships compound. Everything valuable in life tends to reward consistency, and consistency requires emotional control. When you look back at everything we've discussed, a pattern emerges. Laziness prevents action. Pride prevents opportunity. Emotional thinking prevents solutions. Together, these three habits quietly destroy potential, not overnight, but year after year. Small missed opportunities become large missed opportunities. Small delays become major setbacks. Small emotional decisions become life-changing consequences. Most people don't notice it happening. They simply wake up one day and realize they're not where they hoped to be. The good news is that these habits can be changed. Anyone can become more disciplined. Anyone can become more humble. Anyone can become more emotionally intelligent. The process isn't easy, but it's simple. Start taking action instead of waiting. Start learning instead of pretending to know everything. Start solving problems instead of feeding emotions. Those small shifts can completely change the direction of your life. And perhaps the most important lesson is this: success is rarely about doing one extraordinary thing. It's usually about avoiding a few destructive habits long enough for your strengths to grow. The people who build wealth are not perfect. They're not fearless. They're not always the smartest people in the room, but they consistently do a few things well. They act when others hesitate. They stay humble when others protect their ego. They stay focused when others become emotional. And because of that, they continue moving forward while others remain stuck. At the end of the day, money follows value. Value comes from solving problems, and solving problems requires clear thinking. That's why emotional control may be one of the highest paid skills in the world, not because it sounds impressive, but because it allows every other skill you possess to work at its highest level. If you can overcome laziness, let go of unnecessary pride, and learn to control your emotions instead of being controlled by them, you'll already be ahead of most people. And once that happens, success stops feeling like luck. It becomes the natural result of the person you've chosen to become.